post at CPC means a lot to me. Will you come and see how I play Desi? If you're in love with retro gaming, come and join the board. And if you want a Friday foursome, watch him and you could. Novabug.
How you doing, everyone? Novabug here. Let's take a sip of my tea. This is going to be a very casual retro waffle, this. So, I haven't done a video response video for quite a while, and I don't really do them often nowadays because I wait for like really good questions and original questions to come up and interesting topics. An interesting topic recently come up from Ben at T-Rex Space Station channel. Link in the description box, of course. He is the man who composed my theme tune, by the way. If anyone doesn't know, aware of that. He sung and composed my theme tune. So again, thank you for Ben for that terrific theme tune that you gave me. And he basically does an open tag question. So this is for anybody that wants to do a video response, and link back to Ben's video as well on this. 5 things that you miss about the 90s. Now that really plays to me pretty well. I consider the 90s as probably one of the, for me personally, is one of the really best decades for anything, for lots of things. Yeah, there was there's negatives in every decade, but we're not going to dwell on the negatives. I'm going to dwell on the good things about the 90s, and there were loads of good things about the 90s. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is the music. I thought some of the absolute best dance music came out of the 90s. Some terrific stuff. When you had the rave scene, of course, and you had some really the upcoming of some excellent rock bands as well in the 90s, and they're still going today as well. In the later half of the 90s, you had some bands that are still going today. Things like the Prodigy had 2 of their absolute classic albums were released in the 90s, and that's Music for the Zero Generation, which is a game-changing album. And then, of course, from my personal preference, the Fat of the Land, the 3rd studio album, which is an absolutely fantastic piece of music. And I remember vividly going down to HMV, and we used to get the single CDs, in the charts, single CDs, all displayed lovely in the likes of HMV and MBC and stuff like that. All pretty much gone now, unfortunately. And Tower Records. Used to go down to Tower Records in Piccadilly. Fantastic. And I remember going to my local Harrow branch of HMV and waiting on release on the release week for the single of Firestarter. And I remember picking that up and playing Firestarter. And that's when I bought Firestarter. What they did at the time at the Prodigy, they re-released all their older singles as well on single CD. I ended up buying all of them. I bought them all. So I ended up having a collection of all the single CD releases of every Prodigy that was ever released as a single, EPs and of course stuff like that. To focus on one band in particular. But generally the 90s for dance music was brilliant. You had excellent tracks from the KLF and Alternate. I had Alternate on a cassette that a guy I met in college, because I went to college between 92 and 94, and I met a guy called Paul in college. We lost contact now. But he had a copy of Alternate's only studio album, Full On Mask Stereo, which is quite appropriate for these times. It was almost like they were prophesying the future, because it really is full on Mask Stereo right now, isn't it? Anyway, I diverge. And he gave me a really crap copy of it on a cassette, and for years I was searching for the album itself, and only later on, only in the late 2000s and early 2010s, I found it on eBay and I bought it, and I bought it about 35 quid. It was expensive. And then Snap, The Power, and all these other Too Unlimited, and all these cheesy Europop stuff, and I loved all that. I still love it all today. And that's going to lead on to my second thing that I miss about the 90s, which is quite a serious subject, and it's something that really depresses me. In the 90s, when I was growing up anyway, and I travelled around a bit. Mostly I was in London, but there was never this constant barrage of talking about your identity. There was never this. There was never this talk, constant going on about your gender, constant going on about your sexuality, constant going on about your race. We didn't care. I didn't care. I didn't even notice half the time. My circle of friends in school and college and stuff, I had friends from every ethnicity, and I never even noticed. I didn't notice. The first Amiga I ever played on, one of my best mates in school was a chap called Abid Ali, and I remember going round to his house and meeting his parents. I didn't know at the time or care they were Muslim. I didn't care. I didn't even notice, and I don't care now. You know, all I did was there. He was my mate. He was a lovely. We used to love the Shaman. Going back to the music, we used to really we used to recite the lyrics to the Shaman, me and him. And I remember playing on his Amiga, and we went to WrestleMania together as well. That's another thing. In 1992, not WrestleMania, sorry, we went to SummerSlam. WrestleMania, I wish. We went to SummerSlam together in 1992. We were 15 years old, and I loved that. I mean. But that is a microcosm example of I did not see these aspects that are so... They've infected society nowadays. This decade is awful for it, particularly the latter half of it. Is everyone, well not everyone, but most people that have got a loud, shouty voice seems to bang on about race, sexuality, identity. You've got to say this, you've got to say... You know what, fuck off. I hate all that. I'm sorry I'm getting really serious, but I hate all that kind of stuff. And I missed that about the 90s, where you didn't care. Nobody, hardly anybody cared. And that's how it should have been. And that's how it should be now. You would have thought that kind of thought train, that kind of way of living, that kind of happy-go-lucky, don't care about these aspects of an individual personality, you only care about whether they're good or bad. You would have thought that would have progressed even further by this point. Fortunately, we seem to have gone backwards. Which is a damn shame, and it does upset me sometimes when I think about it. But I do miss that about the 90s, the presentness, the natural diversity, as it were. You know, it was natural. It wasn't forced. It wasn't pushed in your face. It was just natural, and it was organic, and people embraced it. And we just don't get that nowadays, and that annoys me. But on to better things. We'll move on to better things. What I also miss is chat rooms and internet messenger and stuff like that. Now we're going into the later half of the 90s here, when these things first started coming around. And I remember, you know, the original MSN Messenger, but more like ICQ. Do you remember ICQ? And things like that. This is way before the Facebooks, the Twitters, the social media stuff. I miss not having social media. It sounds strange. It's a powerful tool for good reasons, but it's also very negative for a lot of other reasons. And I've watched a lot of studies about how damaging social media can be to an individual's psyche. And because you didn't have social media in the 90s, you didn't have that kind of thing. You know, you did things like, I don't know, talk to people face to face, go around their homes, ring them up and actually speak to them on the phone with a voice. You know, stuff like this. But you also had the messaging, the messaging on your internet. With your dial-up internet, of course, and that was so unique at the time, and I loved that. I loved experiencing that, and you could meet new people that way. But normally, you could speak to people from across the waves, across to different countries and stuff like that, and get to know people and become friends with certain people, and we did. I think I became friends with a girl in, I'm sure she was up north, but she was a nurse up north, and I was friends with her online for probably one of my first ever online friends. And yeah, I got talking to her for quite a bit, about a year or so. We were talking solidly, and then obviously things broke down, and you know, you lose contact. I love that. The early instant messaging, the lack of widespread social media, loved it. That was brilliant. The other thing I loved about the 90s, arcades are just the arcades outside shops. It's such something that I miss so much. So when I was at school, we had local news agents, and 3 of the ones close by the school had arcade machines. You know, 3 of them, and you could choose what arcade you wanted to go to in these shops. And they were little news agents run by Indian chaps. 2 of them were, and there was I think a Turkish fella ran the other one. And he used to have at least 3 or 4 arcades out the front under a canopy under the front, and he used to get loads of people. We played R-Type there, and Black Tiger, and Shinobi, and Street Fighter 2. I first had Mortal Kombat experience at another place we used to call Rogers. I played WrestleFest, Space Area. First time I played Twin Cobra as well. These were brilliant memories. Brilliant memories. The fact that doesn't exist anymore, and it's such a shame it doesn't exist. And again, it was a case of mingling with different people, like-minded about arcade games, discussing the game, you know, wondering how it's going to transpose it to your home computer, whatever home computer that we had. And of course, I had an Amstrad. I had friends that had Amigas and STs and a Commodore. Like I said before, I never knew any friends at the time, oddly, that had a Spectrum. Everybody else had something else. They had Atari and all that. But I used to love that. I used to adore that, and it was something that we did going home from school all the time, going to school and from school. The routine coming to school was to get off the bus, because we were living in Pinner at the time, which is about 3 miles away from my school. You used to get off the bus, and you had to walk up to the school, and you'd walk past two of the arcades, two of the newsagents with the arcades, and we'd always go in there. Many a time I was late for school because I was trying to finish a game or something. Just great memories, great memories. I miss the newsagent arcade, as it were. And we had other local arcades as well. There was a place in South Harrow called Video Hits. There was another place up near what was called now Petts Hill, which is near the other end of South Harrow, near another town called Northolt, which was called Take Two Video, and they had a couple of arcades in there as well. Video rental place, you know, they're gone now. Loved it. I miss that so much. Now you can find arcades, but they're in, you know, special places, yeah, like the arcade club up north and stuff like that, or events. You can still experience the arcade, but not just on a whim like that, like you could at a newsagents, and love that kind of stuff. Now it seems all them arcades at newsagents have been replaced with fast food chicken shops for kids to hang around in and stuff their faces with crap, greasy food. Is that my fourth one or third one? Can't remember. I've totally forgotten whether that was my third or fourth one, because I got into a right story there, didn't I? It was my fourth one. So my fifth one. I've got to admit, it's tough to sort of like try and categorise it, but it was just, I just miss the general just feeling, the feeling of it. It brings back a lot of nostalgia memories. It wasn't just part of the games, the culture, the music and all that kind of stuff that I've already mentioned, but just my teenage and young 20s, and getting up to mischief, all that kind of stuff, you know, nothing seriously bad. We never did anything really bad, but meeting new people and getting into scrapes now and then. College was very interesting, and I met a couple of good friends in college, and I'm still in contact with a couple of those now, which is nice. Now people have progressed and moved on. I think my first early experiences of going to pubs was probably something I really do miss. Of course, I've never experienced that again now. You know, seasoned veteran when it comes to pubs, but definitely going into pubs. Different pubs as well, but regular pubs. I remember the first pub I ever went to, I was 15 whenever the first pub I ever went to. It was called the White Horse, and it's still going today. And actually, funnily enough, a couple of weeks ago when I was down in London, up in London should I say, I actually went into the White Horse, and it's amazing, it's incredible that it's still open, and it's wonderful to see it still open and still going. But yeah, we used to go to the Castle on the Harrow on the Hill, the Fornax and Firkin at Harrow, the Fat Controller, the Royal Oak, which became the Rat and Parrot. I could go on about all the pubs I used to go to, all the pubs in Pinner, which mostly, all these pubs are gone now, by the way. Most of them are all completely, they've either been turned into restaurants or flats, not all knocked down in the case of some of them, which is terrible. The Eastcote Arms is knocked down, it's now a bunch of flats. The Froth Finders, the George, as it were, sometimes called the Froth Finders, in Pinner. Now that's knocked down, and they've been trying to build a bunch of ugly, postmodern flats on it for the last 4 years. Looks ugly as fuck. No community. I love the sense of community you get with pubs as well. And so experience in pubs in the 90s was wonderful. It was really good, and I loved the atmosphere. They were so busy back then as well. Before this is before Sky Sports really sort of like impregnated itself into the pub industry, where it was all about socialising. It was about bar games. We had pool tables and arcade machines, of course. The Rat and Power we used to go to when I was a student. That was the first time I ever experienced Point Blank. They had Point Blank arcade in there, and that was when I fell in love with Point Blank, as well as the fruit machine stuff. I was never really into the fruit machines, but yeah, they had arcades in pubs. You know, it's, oh god, I miss that so much. You get it very, very rarely and seldom nowadays. It's in a few pockets of the country nowadays, but not back then. It was very abundant, and this was London at the time. These were all in London, and I miss that London. I do miss that London. I think this fifth one is probably missing the pubs and missing the pub experience of the 90s, but mostly I miss. Yeah, that's what I miss. But you know, tacking on to that, I miss the London of the 90s. You know, I knew the rough areas, I knew the good areas, but you generally didn't feel that bad. You didn't feel under threat. You certainly didn't feel like you're nervous walking around the streets. I remember walking around the streets in the likes of Camden, you know, dead of night and stuff like that, and felt perfectly fine. Now, I would hate to be living in London now, especially in town. I would really, it would worry me, especially with my children now. I've obviously grown up a bit. It would really worry me. But back then, I loved it. I loved experiencing London back then. I really did have an affection for being a Londoner. You know, back then. That's past now. You know, it's gone. And so there you go. There's my responses. It's a bit of a mixed bag of good memories and some serious stuff in there as well. But I thought, you know, nice to have a bit of a chat and say a few stories and let off my feelings on these matters sometimes. What do you miss about the 90s? Most of my things are feel-good stuff, you know, stuff that made me feel good, stuff that made you feel comfortable and welcome and embraced. And, you know, you can always pin that down to nostalgia nowadays. But it's just a shame how a lot of that is starkly different 2 decades later, you know. And it's kind of upsetting in a lot of ways. I guess things move on, but we don't seem to have progressed. We seem to have gone backwards a bit. Technology's certainly progressed, you know. But with everything else, especially with social aspects of it all, we seem to have gone backwards, which is a worry. So I hope that trend changes in the next decade, certainly, and we get back to more like the feeling that we had in the 90s. From my personal point of view, and the personal point of view from the many friends that I acquired and lost over the course of the entire decade of the 90s. And I'm not even speaking about, you know, the consoles and stuff that I played on Super Nintendo and things. I'm not even speaking about that, because they still exist. So I don't miss them because they still exist. There we go. So if you would like to make a response to Ben's video, then please drop a link. Well, no, go to his video. That's the first thing to do. I'll leave it in the pinned link in the comments below. Go to Ben's video, have a watch of Ben's video, and link Ben in to your response if you want to do a response. Yeah, and I hope you enjoy telling a few stories. I'll see you soon. Novabug out.
Hey, Novabug here. I do hope you enjoyed this video. Please support the channel by liking and commenting, and of course subscribing if you haven't already done. If you would like to support me further, please consider joining my bug army via Patreon. And also don't forget to follow me over at Facebook, Twitter, BitChute and Twitch. And a salute to my bug army generals Sam M, Sweet Nanak, Pete Walker and Craig Harrison. Thank you everyone for supporting me. Novabug out.